In the apocalyptic war, Major General Su Ying of the Jia Army crossed over to the scumbag woman who colluded with the scumbag man to murder her husband. As soon as she arrived, she was exiled, accompanied by 2 children and a disabled husband who would kill her every minute. A small injury, a big disability, Su Ying waved her big hand, "It's not a problem. On the way to exile, I didn't eat or drink, and I was chased and sprinkled with water." The material space is in her hands, her left hand is flesh, her right hand is wine, and the assassins come and fight 1 by 1, 2 by 1. Heal the disabled husband, raise chubby and cute children, build mountains and houses on wasteland, surround the land for farming, establish one's own civilization and kingdom, and be one's own queen. After curing her disabled husband's illness, allowing him to kill him back to Shangjing, cleanse his grievances, and reclaim everything that belonged to him, Su Ying and Li Shu went to the table, parting, each with joy. A certain king gritted his teeth to stop people. "Su Ying, you dare to leave and give it a try. Mother, don't you want your treasure anymore?" said the 2 cute treasures as they pounced and hugged Su Ying's leg. Su Ying supports her forehead. "Okay, then let's take it all." Keywords of the novel. I rely on billions of resources to pamper the war god disabled king. No pop-ups, I rely on billions of resources to pamper the war god disabled king. Download the complete set of TXT. I rely on billions of resources to pamper the war god disabled king. Latest chapter to read. Chapter 1. Crossing in Exile. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Crossing in Exile. Brother, do you think she really died? Well, Dad said if you're not angry, you're dead. That's great, so my brother and I won't be sold. Before Su Ying could open her eyes, 2 childish voices could be heard in her ears. She struggled to open a slit between her eyes and saw 2 dirty, skinny children. Because they were too thin, the beautiful phoenix eyes on their small faces appeared particularly large. What's going on? Did she survive the warship explosion? In a moment of confusion, her mind suddenly throbbed, and a memory that didn't belong to her flooded in. Su Ying never expected that the explosion of the warship would squeeze her into a gap in time and space, allowing her spirit to travel to a strange country in parallel space, the state of Chu. And she is currently on her way to exile. Su Ying opened her eyes completely and saw the 2 children jump up with a frightened expression, turn around, and run. "Wow, Dad, help me. The bad woman has woken up again." "Don't be afraid, sister. Brother will protect you." Su Ying. In my memory, I learned that the original owner, also known as Su Ying, was the legitimate eldest daughter born to the wife of the Prime Minister of Chu. Over the years, she was developed into a fool by her stepmother, and was deceived by a scumbag, causing her husband, dragon and phoenix children to be exiled to the northern wasteland. On the way to exile, because the silver she secretly brought had already been used up, the original owner was so hungry that she couldn't bear it anymore. She wanted to sell her 2 children to exchange for some silver money. Unexpectedly, when she went to hold them, she was pushed down by struggling children, and her head hit the ground and she died. Su Ying let out a sigh and cursed in her heart that she deserved it. Su Ying stood up and went to a strange environment. She habitually observed everything around her, surrounded by exiled prisoners. Among them, a few officials sat not far away with dried meat in their hands, eating. The prisoners could only watch eagerly, with only 1 meal a day and hard enough dry food to bite. However, even so, the fist-sized dry food could still make the hungry prisoners' eyes shine. Hiss, there was a sharp pain in her head, and she reached out to wipe her back of the head. Her palm was soaked, but the blood had stopped and there was no major problem for the time being. The injuries she had suffered on the battlefield in the past were much more serious than this. Su Ying didn't pay much attention and just tore a piece of cloth from her body to bandage the wound. In the blink of an eye, Su Ying saw the 2 children hiding under a big tree, under which lay a man whose life or death was unknown. She walked over, and the children trembled with fear when they saw her. Their small face turned pale and they tightly grasped the man's sleeve. You bad woman, don't come over. De Bao, with a dirty face but a particularly determined expression, stood in front of his sister. Even though he was extremely scared, he had no intention of giving in. Bao's voice choked up with fear, Daddy, wake up quickly. The bad woman is going to bully us. Su Ying's mind constantly flashed with images of the original owner treating the two children harshly. They were supposed to have grown up in a luxurious environment, but now they were subjected to such inhumane treatment. The original owner planned to sell the two children for 2 taels of silver. In the team, 1 or 2 taels of silver could be exchanged with the official for 3 days of dry rations. In this environment, what would the other party need to use a few days of dry rations to exchange for the 2 children? Su Ying looked at the man nearby with eager eyes. The dried blood on his mouth was still visible, and the child who had been following him the other day had disappeared. Eat with ease. She was in a post-apocalyptic military camp, accustomed to bloody and brutal fighting, but she didn't expect to encounter such a thing in this place as well. Su Ying looked at the fear and determination in the children's eyes, and her heart was touched. They were like themselves who were thrown into the refining field where they ate people and didn't spit out bones when they were young. I won't sell you. You're lying, you said that before and almost sold your sister. In an instant, Su Ying's mind flashed with the scene of the original owner using half a piece of dry food to trick her little daughter into falling under a tree and preparing to hand her over to a man the day before yesterday. Su Ying is too lazy to despise the original owner. She lowered her eyes and looked at the man on the ground, who was her cheap husband, Shao Jin, the king of Qi of Chu. Under his messy long hair were a pair of deeply twisted sword eyebrows that flew like temples. Even if she didn't open her eyes, Su Ying could still think of the pair of deep and bottomless eyes under those thin eyelids. The high nose and thin lips under his thin lips were tight, indicating that he was currently enduring great pain. Who would have thought that the king of Qi, who had made outstanding military achievements, would become such a ghost? Su Ying squatted down and found that his legs were the most severely injured, with flesh and blood all over them, emitting a foul odor under the tattered and dirty fabric. She raised her hand, ready to examine his injuries, but as soon as she reached halfway, her hands were tightly grasped by 2 small hands. It's De Bao. What are you going to do to Dad? You're not allowed to touch Dad. The post-apocalyptic struggle emphasizes quick battles and quick decisions, which has developed her restless temperament and impatience. Her eyebrows twitched, but when faced with the tears wrapped in her big eyes, her heart was instantly extinguished. I want to check his injuries. If he's injured like this and doesn't receive timely treatment, he'll die. Although the 2 children are young, they have experienced more than the other children, and the journey of exile has deeply understood what death means. I don't want my dad to die, he can't die, Bao's voice was filled with tears. Don't cry, with me around, he won't die. Su Ying tried to make her body sound gentle, but the children wouldn't believe her words at all. It's all you, a bad woman. If it weren't for you, Dad wouldn't have been hurt. Bao held back his tears, his big pupils filled with complaints. Su Ying blushed with sweat. When Shao Jin was seriously injured and unconscious on the battlefield, she took advantage of Shao Jin's coma and hid evidence of his collusion with the enemy in his study. She had someone find it right, otherwise Shao Jin would not have been wrongly imprisoned. It's no use thinking about these things now. The top priority is to deal with Shao Jin's injury, otherwise he won't be able to go to hell for long. Su Ying broke free from her small hands and began to examine the wound on Shao Jin's leg. The 2 little guys were vigilant as they stared at Su Ying to prevent her from doing anything unfavorable to her father. Su Ying lifted the rag on Shao Jin's leg and found that the injury on his leg was even more serious than it seemed. In addition to his leg, he also had various external injuries, but the most fatal ones were still these 2 legs. During the examination, Su Ying suddenly felt a burning sensation between her wrists. She lowered her head and looked at a wooden bracelet with a strange totem carved on it. She stared in amazement. Isn't this her storage space? In the apocalypse, many supplies were extremely scarce. Apart from maintaining a strong development trend in medicine, food-related items were basically scarce. Therefore, she would usually store the necessary items in storage space for unexpected needs. Unexpectedly, this thing also followed her to another world. Su Ying looked around and walked to a big tree, then pulled the mechanism on her wristband to enter the space. A white light flashed past, and space appeared in front of her. There was everything on the neatly arranged shelves, bypassing them and opening another door, where medical supplies were stored. She took medicine and gauze from a small drawer, and then came out from the shelf to take 2 compressed biscuits similar to dry food, and then left the space. When she came out, she didn't see the figures of the 2 children. She didn't think much and only treated Xiao Jin's injuries before speaking. As Su Ying was about to take action, she felt a malevolent gaze fall on her. She looked up vigilantly and met a pair of dark, bottomless eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Miscellaneous, Seeking Death. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Miscellaneous, Seeking Death. Those eyes shone like shattered stars. Even though he was in a state of embarrassment at the moment, it was impossible to ignore his existence. Su Ying frowned. This person was covered in iron-blooded aura, so powerful. His body is at the end of its strength, but he is able to wake up without any treatment, which is truly terrifying willpower. Xiao Jin was already painfully unconscious, staring coldly at Su Ying. If his gaze could kill someone, Su Ying was already riddled with wounds. Get out of here. His voice was hoarse, but it carried an air of awkwardness. Su Ying paused slightly in her hand and stared expressionlessly at his broken body. Your legs have already begun to rot. If you don't dispose of the rotten meat, you will die. Xiao Jin remained unmoved and said, Get lost, don't let me say it a 3rd time. Su Ying sneered and squatted directly in front of him. I'm also a tough guy. When others don't want me to do something, I have to do it. After speaking, Su Ying didn't care if Xiao Jin's gaze could make her feel overwhelmed. She picked up the surgical knife and shaved off all the rotten flesh on Xiao Jin's legs, with many areas shaved to the bone. Both legs were rotten like this, and this person could still hold on to this day. She had to respect him for being a man. Xiao Jin's back was so painful that he was sweating profusely, but he didn't even snort. He gritted his teeth and stared coldly at Su Ying, wanting to see what other tricks this woman could play. After cleaning both legs, Su Ying took out nutritional supplements and anti-inflammatory drugs to feed him. But Xiao Jin gritted his teeth and refused to let go even when he died. Su Ying has never been a patient person. Why, I have to feed you mouth to mouth before you're willing to open your mouth, right? Little rabbit, dare to steal dry food and seek death. Ah! The childish and brutal cry caught Su Ying's attention. She stood up and saw the official not far away whipping the little people on the ground with a whip in his hand. Jia Army. Xiao Jin sat up from the ground, propped up his severely injured body, and looked at the little person who had been stepped on by the official, his eyes bursting with killing intent. Su Ying only then noticed that the 2 children had not appeared yet. She looked at Xiao Jin, who was about to stand up from the ground, and quickly reached out to press him back. Don't move, your legs have just been treated, and if you move them randomly, you will suffer secondary damage. Get lost. Su Ying was pushed back by Xiao Jin, causing her to stumble and take a step back. She was also angry and directly pulled off the cloth strip from him, tying him to the tree root behind her. Be honest here. After saying this, she turned around and walked towards the official's direction. Dare to bully the children of this major general, seek death. Where the hell do you come from, you bastard? Dare to steal my jerky, and don't even see what you're like. The official stepped on Dabao's small face, and his rough soul was even larger than Dabao's face. Brother, whoa, please don't hit brother, please don't hit brother. Ah! Before Bao could finish speaking, he was kicked by the official to Bao's side. The official laughed wildly and said, then you can die with your brother, ha ha ha. The official's unrestrained laughter was still stuck in his throat. In a blink of an eye, he met a pair of sparkling pupils, those eyes shining with a cold and eerie light, like the evil spirits of Shura who had crawled out of hell. Su Ying tugged at the corner of her lips, lifted her knee, and fiercely collided with the official's cross. Wow! The official screamed in pain, curled up into a shrimp and fell to the ground. Su Ying turned her eyes and stared at the official who had stepped on Bao's face. She grabbed a branch from the ground and flew over. Ah! The branch accurately pierced the officer's calf, causing him to fall out in pain. Su Ying, with a tense face, walked up to the two children and pulled them behind her to protect her. SP stinky girls, seek death. The other officials surrounded Su Ying one after another, and they raised their long whips and fiercely whipped Su Ying. Su Ying's cold eyes sank as she grabbed the whip and forcefully snatched it from the official's hand. Who wants to die, maybe? The long whip in Su Ying's hand was whipped back and hit the official hard. Her clothes were already in tattered condition, her messy long hair fluttering in the cold wind, and her eyes were filled with bloodthirsty crimson. She stood in the wind, like a demon god. The official who was repeatedly knocked to the ground dared not move forward, and his gaze towards Su Ying became frightened. The prisoners around were all stunned by the scene in front of them. It's not an exaggeration for these exiled prisoners to say that life and death are all in the hands of these officials. But today, this woman dares to fight with the officials. Is this not wanting to die? You're so bold. You dare to fight the official, you don't want to die. The official, led by you, looked at Su Ying walking towards him and retreated in fear. Su Ying threw the whip in his face and said, Beihuang is a land of three nothings. If you go there, you will die, and if you go here, you will also die. I don't mind taking you guys for burial. Today's incident is a warning. If you dare to touch Su Ying's people again in the future, I will send you on your way first. The official had no doubt that Su Ying would do what she said. In the state of Chu, being exiled to the northern wasteland was equivalent to death. If she really launched a fierce campaign to ask them to be buried with her, based on the previous battle situation, they may not necessarily be opponents of this woman. So, in the face of Su Ying's threat, the officials dare not speak up anymore. Su Ying turned around and approached the two children. First, she checked Bao's injuries. His back was covered in whiplash injuries, and blood was still oozing from the corners of his mouth. He lay on the ground like a rag doll, without any signs of anger. The anger in Su Ying's chest surged again. She should have wasted those miscellaneous hands just now. Brother, what's wrong with brother? Brother. Bao was just being protected by Bao, with only some skin injuries on his body, so there was no problem. Su Ying carefully checked Bao's condition and only picked him up after confirming that he could move. She didn't forget to turn back to comfort the frightened Bao. Don't cry, with me around, brother will be fine. Bao was sobbing, with tears streaming down her face. She was just a child under 4 years old, and even though Su Ying had done a lot of outrageous things to her in the past, the kindness she exuded at this moment made her instinctively choose to believe her. Jia. Xiao Jin struggled as she looked at Bao who had been carried back by Su Ying. His black eyes were crimson, and his hands bound by Su Ying were already bloodshot. Su Ying glanced at him, frowned, and said in a deep voice, "Don't move around. Since I can save the child, I will definitely ensure that he is safe." After speaking, she carefully placed Bao beside Xiao Jin and immediately untied the rope on Xiao Jin's body. Xiao Jin locked his eyes tightly on Bao and reached out to examine his injuries. When touching Bao's scarred little body, Xiao Jin's eyes were low and his killing intent spurted out. He clenched his fists tightly, and he was sure to shatter the bodies of those who had hurt Jia into pieces. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Serious Injury, Treatment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Serious Injury, Treatment. Dad, brother, how is he doing? Bao looked at Bao, who was on the brink of death, crying and trembling all over. Xiao Jin could only hold her body up and comfort her in his arms. It's okay, brother will be fine. When Su Ying came out from behind the big tree, she already had an extra bundle in her hand. She came to Bao and opened the small bundle, which was filled with medicine for treating external injuries. Xiao Jin looked at those medicine black eyes, which sank. The cold and scrutinizing eyes were tightly locked onto Su Ying's body. Su Ying is the daughter of the Prime Minister, who has been raised by her stepmother since childhood. She is a standard noble woman, not to mention fighting or killing someone. She dare not even mention a chicken, but her appearance just now is completely different from before. Xiao Jin's cold eyes were slightly dark, hiding deep enough. Su Ying didn't know what Xiao Jin was thinking. She rinsed the wound on the child's body with disinfectant to prevent infection, which would make treatment even more difficult. The disinfectant touched the wound and it was very painful, but Bao didn't react at all, which inevitably made Su Ying worried. The child had completely lost consciousness. After quickly treating the wound, she took out anti-inflammatory medicine and fed it to him. Originally, the infusion effect was faster in this situation, but conditions did not allow it, so she had to take the medicine first. The officials and their group were beaten up severely. They were supposed to rush on their way, but now they are not leaving. Tonight, everyone will be repairing in place. Su Ying also fed Bao some nutrients to ensure the supply of energy to the body. After finishing all of this, Su Ying was also a bit tired. Her body was too weak. She was able to handle those official positions just now and also relied on the power of the infinite power bracelet in the space. If she had placed those small miscellaneous items before, she could have pinched them with just one finger, so she wouldn't have used any auxiliary tools. Su Ying's wrong eye met Xiao Jin's scrutinizing gaze, and she raised her eyebrows, almost forgetting him. She took out Xiao Jin's medicine again and placed it in front of him. This is your medicine. If you don't want to die, just take it obediently. Xiao Jin narrowed her black eyes and watched as the black pill on the ground remained motionless. Why, I'm afraid I'll poison you. If I want to kill you, why do I need to kill your two useless legs? You cannot take the medicine. But if you are dead, your two children, I will do what I want to do. A faint and cold dim light flashed in Xiao Jin's eyes. At this moment, a pair of tender little hands reached out and took the medicine to Xiao Jin's mouth. Dad, please take your medicine obediently. Once you take the medicine, you will be fine. Xiao Jin regained his senses and looked at his daughter's crying eyes. After a cold glance at Su Ying, he opened his mouth and took the medicine. He refused to refuse his daughter and saw her disappointed expression. Xiao Jin was seriously injured, and after taking the medicine, he felt a wave of drowsiness. In the blink of an eye, he fell asleep. Daddy, Daddy, what's wrong with you? Bao looked at Xiao Jin and was stunned. Su Ying looked over and said, your dad is just too weak to sleep. Let him sleep more. If he sleeps well, his recovery will be faster. Bao looked at Xiao Jin and then looked up at Su Ying. When she met Su Ying's eyes, she shrank away from Xiao Jin in fear. Su Ying took out compressed dry food from her body and delivered it to her. You're hungry, let's eat something first. Bao's eyelashes trembled with tears still hanging from his eyes, eagerly glancing at the dry food in Su Ying's hand. She had not eaten anything since yesterday and was already so hungry that her chest pressed against her back. But she didn't dare to eat Su Ying's food. I'm not hungry. Are you still stealing dry food with your brother if you're not hungry? Bao opened his big red eyes and said, brother said, Dad can get better when he's full, but I don't have any dry food. Su Ying's heart twitched slightly. So you guys went to the official's place and wanted to get some dry food for your dad to eat. Bao nodded somewhat dejectedly. They were clumsy and were caught by the official while taking the dry rations. Now they have not received the dry rations, and their brother is also injured. Su Ying reached out and carried her to her side, placing the dry food in her small hand. Don't worry, your dad will definitely get better. Guess who I saw when I fainted just now? Bao was suddenly hugged by her and didn't dare to move. His big watery eyes looked extremely pitiful. Su Ying continued without changing her expression, do you know that the King of Hell did a lot of bad things? He said that I was supposed to take me to the underworld, but you are too young. If I leave, no one will take care of you. So he released me and asked me to take good care of you. He also warned me not to do bad things again, otherwise he will take me away. Bao was taken aback for a moment and said, will Yan Wangye catch you if you do something bad? Su Ying nodded confidently and said, yes, so you don't have to be afraid that I will sell you. Let's eat this dry food with peace of mind. Bao believed the words of the King of Hell, so he didn't refuse Su Ying anymore. He held the dry food in his small hand and ate it in small bites like a hamster. Su Ying was afraid that she would choke, so she took out a water bag from the space and asked her to drink water. After eating and drinking enough, Bao also fell asleep. She shrunk her body into a small ball and leaned against Xiao Jin, closing her eyes. Su Ying is also very tired, but there are evil spirits lurking around. She can't sleep, especially since she taught the officials a lesson. These people definitely won't just give up. It is now autumn, and as night falls, there is a refreshing scent in the air. Su Ying took out a heating pad from the space and pasted it on the three of them. This is an infrared heating pad, only the size of a nail cap. If you don't pay attention, you won't notice it at all. After applying the heating pad, it can keep the human body in a comfortable temperature for more than 10 hours. After putting on the warming film, Su Ying instantly felt much warmer on her body. It's time to distribute dry rations, but there has been no movement from the official side. The hungry prisoners rushed towards the direction where the official was. No, there's no dry food today. If you want to eat, ask that woman if she wants to go. She's so powerful, she definitely has dry food for you to eat. The official was scolded by Su Ying today. If we don't find a way to retrieve the venue, these prisoners will not be able to turn the tables. So they decided not to distribute dry food at night and let these prisoners go to trouble Su Ying, letting her know what it would be like to offend them. The black shadow blocked the glow in front of Su Ying, and Su Ying looked up and saw three big men approaching. It's all you bitches, causing us to have no food to eat. Hand over those two little bunnies, otherwise you'll have to look good. The big man was covered in dirt, and under his messy eyebrows were a pair of copper bell-sized bull eyes, glaring angrily at her. Su Ying remembered that this person was going to spend money to buy two children. If you don't have dry rations, why do you go find the official? What do you want me to do? Su Ying's eyebrows and eyes were cold, his eyes lowered without a hint of warmth. SP bitch, I didn't eat anything, so I ate you. A fierce light appeared on the three faces, like a starving hyena rushing towards Su Ying. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Stinger, Princess Chi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Stinger, Princess Chi. Su Ying let out a low curse and impatiently picked up the thick branch of the branch on the side of her arm. As the big man rushed towards her, she fiercely hit the arm he had raised with a stick. Before the big man could cry out in pain, her wooden stick fell down again. This time, it hit him hard on the mouth. The big man stumbled and fell to the ground with a thud, spitting out several yellow teeth and thick blood. Su Ying didn't give him a chance to catch his breath, so she pulled off his belt and passed it through his armpit. Then, she threw the other end of the belt onto the tree and pulled it, instantly hanging the big man onto the sturdy trunk. Bitch, why don't you leave your nest? The two big men who followed wanted to step forward with fierce eyes, but as soon as they took a step forward, Su Ying's wooden stick fiercely hit the big man on the tree. The final glow of the sunset fell into Su Ying's cold and beautiful eyes, like a blazing fire that could incinerate people. If you dare to take one step forward, I will take off one of his arms. If you take 2 steps forward, I will cripple one of his legs until I break all the bones on his body. The two big men were so frightened by Su Ying's powerful evil energy that they dared not move any further, reminiscent of her fierce fighting with the officials that they dared not move forward. The other prisoners had long noticed the situation here and dared not confront Su Ying even when they saw a few thorns, so they gave up some unnecessary caution. The official who wanted to wait and see a good play felt unwilling to see Su Ying like this, but he also dared not cause any more trouble. What's the origin of that woman? She looks like a demon. The official glanced at Su Ying and immediately looked away in fear as they met Su Ying's gaze. They had never seen such a terrifying prick before. Su Ying, Princess Qi. A slender official spoke softly. What? Princess Qi. That flowery little rascal, how could this be possible? The others were all shocked. There is a promiscuous and hasty eldest daughter born at the Prime Minister's residence, which is not a secret in the capital. She usually revolves around the Crown Prince Xiaoju when she has nothing to do, wishing she could strip herself naked and send her to the Crown Prince's bed. Unexpectedly, fate played tricks on her, but the Emperor married her to the King of Qi. After marriage, she was still unclear with the eldest prince and was talked about by people. However, it's not important anymore. What's important is, how did this fool suddenly become so powerful? When he killed someone, how could he look like a useless little rascal who only knows about romance and romance? As the officials whispered about Su Ying, there was also a pair of gloomy eyes among the prisoners looking in the direction where Su Ying was. Su Ying suddenly looked up at the crowd behind her, only to see lifeless prisoners. She frowned and withdrew her gaze. She had very keen senses, and just now she felt an extremely aggressive gaze. Before she could delve deeper, the Bao lying beside her began to snort. Su Ying withdrew her thoughts and reached out to touch the Bao's forehead. My forehead is scorching hot, damn it, I still have a fever. She carefully examined the wound on the Bao's back, which was slightly red and swollen, but the anti-inflammatory drugs still did not dissipate the inflammation. She stood up in the dark of the night and arrived at the back of the big tree. When she came out again, she already had a micro-needle filled with anti-inflammatory medicine in her hand. The micro-needle was only the size of a thumb and would not be noticed when held in her hand. She returned to the Bao's side, injected the medicine into him, and then fed him antipyretic medicine. Judging from the wound's surface, the fever may not last for 3 to 5 days. In order to make the Bao sleep more comfortably, Su Ying lifted his head onto her lap and let him rest on her to sleep. Bad woman, you can't sell your sister. The Bao tightly twisted his already formed sword eyebrows, looking very restless in his sleep. Su Ying listened to his dreamy words and slowly exhaled a breath. Her slightly warm hand lightly landed on his small head and said in a very low voice, "Don't be afraid, with me around, no one can bully you anymore." Then, she hummed a soothing lullaby in her mouth. This song was taught to her by Amu, the only one who gave her warmth in the camp back then. Whenever she felt anxious and uneasy, Amu would hum this song for her. She once swore to take Amu out of that bloody world, but Amu was torn to pieces by the zombie before the day she became stronger. Su Ying closed her eyes, hiding the pain in the depths of her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she had already regained her cold and lifeless appearance. Under Su Ying's comfort, the Bao gradually calmed down, and Su Ying took advantage of this gap to lean under the tree and close her eyes. At the moment when her breathing became even, Xiao Jin suddenly opened his black eyes. The dark starry eyes fell heavily on Su Ying, and the night couldn't suppress the strong coldness in his eyes. He didn't believe that Su Ying would suddenly turn to treating him and the children kindly. He was waiting now and needed to know what the woman's ultimate goal was. The fish belly white rising from the sky is tinged with a faint ink color. When Su Ying opened his eyes, the official had already waved his long whip and scolded the still weak prisoners to get up and rush on. Get up, get out of here. There is a time limit for officials to escort prisoners, and they need to be sent back to the capital at a specific time for reporting. Otherwise, even if the task is not completed, they will be punished. They were delayed for a little while yesterday, so today they naturally have to leave early to make up for the delayed journey. Su Ying stood up and glanced at the broken branch next to her. The big man who had been hanging on it yesterday had already been rescued by her accomplices. She didn't pay much attention to these scumbags. She beat each one and killed a pair of them. As soon as Xiao Jin woke up, a piercing pain came from his leg. This was the first time in the past few days that he felt such pain in his leg. Although the pain was unbearable, he knew it was because his injury was improving. He held back the pain and picked up air bow, but as soon as he moved, his arms still let out the force and could only barely lift the child. It was impossible for him to stand up and walk. Su Ying was about to carry the big treasure when she saw Xiao Jin's dark face. You can't even stand still and want to carry the child away. You have to see if you have the ability to show off. Xiao Jin's pupils shrank, and a dark color swirled from his deep black eyes. When Su Ying met his gaze, she felt as if she was being stared at by a black hole, making her feel uncomfortable all over. I don't know from what kind of pile of evil spirits this person crawled out of, which gave him the pressure to consume in such a miserable situation. Su Ying waved to air bow and said, "Linger, come to me. I have dry food to eat." Air Bao was still a bit afraid of Su Ying, but she obediently stood up from Xiao Jin, who had already shed cold sweat on his forehead due to the pain of the wound. "Dad, Linger is not injured, Linger can walk on her own." Su Ying stuffed a piece of dry food into Air Bao's hand and said, "Be good, eat something first and we'll be on our way later." Air Bao looked at Su Ying with a dry grain in his hand, and Su Ying understood and said, "Don't worry, your father also has it." Upon hearing her say this, Air Bao obediently ate it. Xiao Jin struggled to stand up, but as soon as he moved his leg, a heart-wrenching pain came from him, and he finally sat back on the ground powerless. Just as he was about to try again, his arm was suddenly lifted by someone. In the next moment, he was supported by Su Ying and stood up. The veins in front of Xiao Jin's forehead jumped. Let go. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Is great, good luck to you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 is great, good luck to you. Su Ying not only didn't let go, but also deliberately placed her hand on his waist. Her abdominal muscles were quite strong. Xiao Jin's body stiffened, his eyes lowered and he flashed a killing intent. As Su Ying was stunned, he suddenly grabbed her wrist and the other hand grabbed her neck. Su Ying was caught off guard and stumbled into the trunk behind her, looking up at Xiao Jin's face twisted with evil energy. "Su Ying, you're looking for death." Due to the injury on his leg, Xiao Jin was unable to stand, and this position made him almost press all his weight on Su Ying's body. "Ah-ha!" Su Ying let out a muffled groan as she looked at Xiao Jin's face, which was just a stone's throw away. "Xiao Jin, you don't know what to do. If you have the ability, you can leave on your own." Su Ying grabbed Xiao Jin's hand in the back, surprised that his strength was much greater than she had imagined. Xiao Jin's grip tightened a little, and he coldly stung her. "Don't touch me," he said as he released his grip. "Okay, good luck to you," Su Ying sneered without getting angry. After speaking, she pushed Xiao Jin away and came to the bow, picking him up from the ground and holding him in front of her with a cloth strap. "Dad!" Air Bao was so scared by the confrontation between the two just now that he almost lost his dry food in his hand. Xiao Jin listened to Air Bao's soft and sticky voice, took a deep breath, bent down, and picked up 2 branches the size of his arms from the ground to support him. The simple action had already made his back sweat wet. Linger, follow your father. Air Bao let out a sigh and stepped forward with short legs to support Xiao Jin, although her little strength couldn't be of much help. Su Ying glanced at Xiao Jin and saw that he had put most of his strength on both hands without saying a word. Dog man, let's see how long you can hold on. As exiled prisoners, they are not qualified to walk on official roads and are afraid of colliding with passing nobles, so they have been walking through the wilderness along the way. Su Ying walked in the team, during which she noticed that there were very few familiar faces in the team. The Qi king colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country, which angered the emperor. He had originally intended to have the Qi prince's mansion cut off, but the empress cried and pleaded with the emperor, so the emperor changed his sentence of exile. The entire Qi prince's mansion will be exiled to the northern wasteland, with over 100 people, but now there are not many people in the team who she looks familiar with. Because the original owner did not pay attention to the lives and deaths of the other people in the Qi prince's mansion, and only vaguely remembered that these people had gradually disappeared. He did not remember the specific situation. After all, it was not uncommon for the prisoners to die on the road of exile. Su Ying frowned slightly. It seemed that those people had no intention of letting Xiao Jin go like this. In my memory, the capital was thousands of miles away from Beihuang, and it took me at least several months to walk there. By the time they arrived at Beihuang, it was already winter. Although she had storage space, everything inside was limited except for medical supplies. I don't know about the situation in Beihuang yet, so she needs to take the opportunity to collect more useful materials along the way. Su Ying ate 2 meals of dry food in the space and drank the supply liquid. Although her body was still a bit weak, it was much better than when she first woke up. However, the prisoners who couldn't eat dry food last night were not doing well. They were already hungry all the way, and last night they didn't even stutter, so the team slowed down as they walked. What are you doing? What are you all doing? I haven't had any food to eat tonight, so hurry up and let me go. Ah! Under the beating of the officials, the exhausted prisoners fell down, but the officials didn't care about their lives. In the state of Chu, as long as they were exiled to the northern wasteland and left the border, even Chu people were no longer there, and there was no room for them to turn over. That's why the officials were so reckless. Daddy, Daddy. What's wrong with you? Suddenly, Air Bao's crying voice came from behind. Su Ying turned around and saw that Xiao Jin had fallen to the ground at some point. A government official saw this and walked towards Xiao Jin with a whip in hand. When the official approached Xiao Jin, Su Ying had already walked ahead. The official who raised his whip suddenly met Su Ying's cold eyes, instinctively shrinking his neck and glaring fiercely at Xiao Jin before walking towards the back of the team. Daddy, Daddy. Woo-woo. Air Bao squatted in front of Xiao Jin, his 2 small hands trying hard to help Xiao Jin up from the ground, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake Xiao Jin. Su Ying snorted and had already examined Xiao Jin's leg. There was already a slight bleeding on the gauze, but fortunately it was not severe. He had fainted due to exhaustion. Relying on her arms and Dantian's core strength to walk so far, it surprised her. Taking advantage of no one's attention, Su Ying quickly stuffed a ginseng supply pill into his mouth and immediately helped him onto her back to carry. Don't be fooled by Xiao Jin's almost emaciated physique, but she's not light at all. Fortunately, she has assistive devices in her space, otherwise she wouldn't be able to carry people. Linger doesn't cry. Dad was too tired and fell asleep. I carried him on my back and we continued on our journey. Upon hearing Su Ying say that Xiao Jin was just asleep, Air Bao sobbed and stopped crying. Su Ying tied Xiao Jin to her body with the rattan she had picked up, preventing him from falling, but she couldn't spare a third hand to hold Air Bao. She carried the crowd behind her back and took out the water bottle the size of a palm and whispered to Air Bao's lips, "Drink some water first, then grab your brother's leg and don't let go, okay?" Xiao Jin fainted, his brother was seriously injured, and Air Bao had no one to rely on. At this point, he could only choose to trust Su Ying. I don't run around, just hold on to my brother obediently. Su Ying felt more and more sorry for the child. After gently patting her little head, she followed the group with a large and two small children. Su Ying, a thin and small woman, walked with a big man and a child on her back without blushing or jumping. Everyone else was surprised and even more convinced that she was an outsider who could not be easily provoked. In the middle of the day, the sun above my head became increasingly intense, making me dizzy and unable to open my eyes. Xiao Jin woke up in a scorching heat and saw Su Ying's face covered in dirt and black marks due to sweating. His eyes sank before he realized that he was being carried on her back. Xiao Jin's eyebrows furrowed deeply. He saw that although Su Ying was sweating profusely, carrying him and holding Jia on his back did not put any effort into walking. This was not something that Su Ying could do before. If it weren't for her hiding deep enough, there would only be one possibility left. She is not Su Ying. Xiao Jin's gaze sank and fell on Su Ying's neck. As she hadn't taken a shower for over a month, her neck was already pitch black, but the black mole on her Dasui acupoint was very prominent. This black mole is not big, even Su Ying herself is unaware of its existence, but Xiao Jin is aware of it. She is Su Ying. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Climbing the Mountain and Collecting Materials. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Climbing the Mountain and Collecting Materials. A hint of mockery flashed through Xiao Jin's eyes. She had put in a lot of effort to get close to him, and even he didn't see that she was a practitioner. With such a useful chess piece, how could Xiao Ju easily give up? Xiao Jin looked sideways at De Bao, who was sleeping soundly in Su Ying's arms, and restrained his killing intent. Since Su Ying wanted to pretend, he took advantage of this time to heal his injuries and take her life when her fox tail was exposed. With this in mind, he slowly closed his eyes again. In order to make their way, the team did not stop at noon. The officials were still worried that the prisoners would die before leaving the country. After the sun set, they found a place to settle at the foot of a mountain and distributed dry food. Su Ying also went to collect dry rations to avoid arousing suspicion when eating later. She was not afraid of these people, but also did not want to cause unnecessary trouble. The mountain behind her was very high and the forest was dense. In order to prevent wild animals from invading, she did not seek a large tree at the foot of the mountain to rest. Instead, she found a grassland with a wider view to loosen Xiao Jin and De Bao from her body and place them on the grassland. Su Ying is also tired, but she still needs to take care of her Bao first. Bao followed her on the road all day today. Several times on the way, she was so tired that she was about to cry, but she kept her mouth shut and didn't let the tears roll down. Su Ying held her in her arms and reached out to take off the small embroidered shoes on her feet that were no longer visible in color, and treated the blisters on her feet. Bao was already exhausted and powerless, leaning against Su Ying's embrace, his eyelids getting heavier and heavier. Good girl, don't sleep yet. Eat something first. Su Ying brought the dry food from the space to her mouth. The little baby was both hungry and sleepy, and instinctively opened his mouth to eat the fragrance. Before the last bite of dry food could be swallowed, he completely fell asleep. Su Ying watched as she slept soundly with her pout, and the cold light in her eyes softened. After putting the warm pad on Bao's body, she placed her on the soft grass and then stood up to check De Bao's condition. De Bao has been unconscious for a day, and she has given him 2 anti-inflammatory injections during the day, but he still maintains a low fever. Su Ying took out glucose supplement and fed it to De Bao bit by bit to maintain his physical function. She also gave him some anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving drugs before walking up to Xiao Jin. As soon as she reached out, she suddenly met her eyes that were deep into the cold pool. Her hand froze in mid-air, and as soon as she turned, she placed the dry food, medicine, and water bag aside. Wake up just right, so I won't have to feed you. After speaking, she didn't care about him and went straight back to sit next to the two treasures, taking out dry food from her body and eating it. Today, Su Ying took medicine on Xiao Jin. After taking the medicine, he fell asleep on her for a day. Xiao Jin's spirit improved a bit. He sat up with his body propped up and glanced at the black pill and dry food on the ground. Without any movement in his frozen eyes, he picked up the dry food and started eating it. Su Ying caught a glimpse of him eating, but didn't pay any attention to him anymore. After finishing her meal, Su Ying sat cross-legged in the qi-sinking dantian and began to regulate her breathing. The method of regulating her breathing was still told by a comrade from an ancient martial arts family that her current body was too weak to handle. As a decisive warrior in the end of the world, she couldn't accept that she couldn't kill a cow with just one punch. As the night deepened, the surroundings fell into silence. Su Ying slowly exhaled the turbid qi from her body, and after regulating her breathing, she felt more energetic than sleeping. She looked at the mountain behind her under the moonlight. The mountain was not high, but the vegetation was very dense, and there must be many wild animals in the forest. Su Ying thought of the delicious meat and instinctively licked her lips. In the end of the world, there were no normal poultry to eat, and wild animals had become the most coveted spoils of war after various military struggles. Now, with such a mountain filled with wild animals in front of her, how could Su Ying miss this opportunity to fill the space? After all, she is not familiar with the terrain of the state of Chu, so it is very likely that this opportunity will be missed every time. Su Ying stood up, reached out and patted the three of them. Then, she took out the medicine powder from her body and sprinkled it around the father and son. The medicine powder was poisonous, and anyone who approached it, whether human or beast, would surely die. She patted them as a nasal antidote. After getting ready, Su Ying took advantage of the dark night to avoid the patrolling officers and infiltrated the mountains behind her. She didn't notice that as soon as she left, Xiao Jin opened his eyes. He lowered his gaze and looked at the direction in which Su Ying had disappeared. Su Ying, you can't wait to reveal your fox tail. Ha-Chiu, Su Ying, who had entered the mountain, suddenly sneezed, and it was unknown who was muttering about her most of the night. She pulled the mechanism on her wristband to enter the space, took out a sharp dagger, an anesthesia gun, and an illuminated hand lamp from a storage rack on her right, and then left the space. The further up the mountain, the lower the temperature inhaled by the nose. She found the trail of a brown bear under a tree using the light of a hand lamp. She followed the trail all the way down to a cave entrance. The footprints disappear in front of the cave entrance, and the brown bear is likely hidden inside. Su Ying picked up a stone from the ground and threw it towards the cave entrance. The sound of a snap startled the brown bear in the cave. Soon, a foul smell came from the air. Su Ying's lips curled up, and the prey came out. She turned off her flashlight and hid behind a big tree, raising her anesthesia gun to aim at the slowly moving brown bear. Without waiting for any response from the bear, the anesthetic needle penetrated the bear's body. 3, 2, 1. Wow! The brown bear fell to the ground with a loud roar. Su Ying walked out satisfied, and the dagger in her hand flickered with a stinging silver light in the night. Su Ying crudely bled the brown bear, then peeled off its fur completely, and then dismantled it in 8 pieces before putting it into space. The time in space is stationary, so there is no possibility of raw meat entering and undergoing a qualitative change in decay. Pack up the brown bear. It was already late at night, and Su Ying hit some wild rabbits and chickens in the mountains before heading down the mountain. As soon as she reached the foot of the mountain, she heard a strange movement coming from behind a big tree in front of her. What are you going to do? Oh, what are you doing? Of course, it's to help the official save food and kill him. You are people sent by Xiao Ju, Su Ying didn't want to meddle in her own affairs, but when she heard the word Xiao Ju, she still stopped in her tracks. Xiao Ju was just using her scumbag. If she hadn't been deceived by his sweet words, she wouldn't have been foolish enough to plot against her husband. Although she was foolish first and couldn't blame anyone else, Xiaoju was by no means a good person. Su Ying turned around and came to the tree, where she saw two men lifting their stones and throwing them at the people on the ground. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Su Ying, you must die hard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Su Ying, you must die hard. The man reluctantly closed his eyes, but he didn't feel the pain of the stone falling for a long time. He slowly opened his eyes and saw Su Ying fighting against the backlight. Half of her face sank into the night, with only a faint moonlight shining on her thin face. But even so, the man still recognized her. Su Ying, it was indeed Xiaoju who sent you here. You can kill or cut as you please. Even if I were a ghost, I would never let you go. Su Ying saw his appearance clearly, and a memory flashed through her mind, recognizing him as Xiao Jin's confidant, former commander of the southern gate of the Forbidden Army, Jiang Yang. Jiang Yang glared at her with hatred in his eyes and said, Su Ying, you colluded with Xiaoju to assassinate the prince. You must die hard. Su Ying glanced at the two people she had shot with an anesthetic gun and said, are they people sent by Xiaoju? Jiang Yang's hatred grew stronger in his eyes. You don't have to pretend here, who else can there be besides him? Su Ying raised an eyebrow and looked at him, are you injured? Jiang Yang snorted coldly, if you want to kill, then kill. There's not so much nonsense. Su Ying looked at him speaking with a weak breath but not a painful expression on his face. He must have been exhausted from hunger before he had the strength to resist. She threw dry food at him and said, get up before you die. Your prince is as heavy as a cow, and I don't want to carry it anymore. Jiang Yang suddenly looked up and said, what's wrong with the prince? There were too many people in the team, and they were deliberately separated from Xiao Jin. In addition, there were people who were making things difficult everywhere, so he had no idea about Xiao Jin's situation. If you want to know, just follow and see for yourself, Su Ying said without further ado, turning around and walking towards the place where she stopped. Jiang Yang watched as he reached out and grabbed the dry food on the ground, swallowing it all in his stomach. After regaining some strength, he got up and stumbled after Su Ying. Su Ying had already returned to the grass and sat down. After confirming that the two treasures were fine, she lay down next to them and prepared to squint for a while. Jiang Yang chased after him and saw Xiao Jin lying on the ground. After Su Ying left, Xiao Jin woke up, and when she heard the commotion, she opened her eyes and saw Jiang Yang running towards her. Prince! A hint of surprise flashed in Xiao Jin's eyes. Jiang Yang, you're still alive. He knew that someone had been targeting the people in the Wang mansion. He was seriously injured and had no time to take care of his two children, thinking that Jiang Yang had also been poisoned. Someone is going to take action on me tonight, he said, glancing at Su Ying. Later, the poisonous woman suddenly appeared and got rid of me. I didn't know what that poisonous woman wanted to do. Xiao Jin's dark eyes swept towards Su Ying, believing that Jiang Yang's loyalty would not deceive him. However, Su Ying's actions were indeed strange, as she had the kindness to save her own people. Prince, is your injury okay? Xiao Jin's deep eyes were faint, I can't die yet. Even if I try my best, I will definitely protect the prince and the young prince, little princess. How many people from the royal family are left in the team? Xiao Jin's face darkened slightly. Jiang Yang clenched his fist and said, there are less than 30 people left, and it remains to be seen whether there are any spies among them. Xiao Jin's eyebrows and eyes were cold and solemn, his eyes lowered without any movement. Find an opportunity to contact someone you trust, and don't worry about the rest for now. I understand. With Jiang Yang present, Xiao Jin fell asleep in the latter half of the night. A golden light pierced through the clouds and landed on Su Ying's eyelids. She suddenly opened her eyes, with no trace of a newly awakened haze. She sat up and reached out to touch the bough beside her. Xiao Niwa still had a low fever, so she could only continue to give him anti-inflammatory injections. Xiao Erbao also leisurely opened her foggy big eyes, rubbed them, and stared blankly in Su Ying's direction. Su Ying never knew that human cubs could be so cute, so she went up and picked her up to feed her water and dry food. Erbao is no longer so afraid of Su Ying anymore, obediently leaning against her arms and quietly eating. After finishing her meal, she walked up to Xiao Jin and her big eyes were full of concern. "Daddy, do you still feel pain? If Ling'er gives you a wine, it won't hurt anymore." My daughter's softness and cuteness softened Xiao Jin's cold and hard face. "Dad doesn't hurt anymore, he'll get better soon," she said. Baoxin smiled happily and said, "Okay, Dad will be fine soon. This is the medicine and dry food that Dad needs to take." She put the medicine and dry food that Su Ying gave her into Xiao Jin's hand. Jiang Yang wanted to say that the food given by the poisonous woman cannot be eaten. Turning to the thought that she had also eaten the dry food she gave last night to have the strength to catch up, she didn't speak up. Xiao Jin did not refuse, only coldly stung Su Ying and ate all the dry food and medicine. Su Ying carried the bao in front of her like yesterday and waved at Bao. "Ling'er, come here, I'll carry you." Bao looked at Xiao Jin and saw her nodding before she stumbled over to Su Ying. Jiang Yang saw Su Ying carrying two children and also helped Xiao Jin up. "I'll carry the prince," he said. Xiao Jin let out a faint hum as he looked at him without any injuries. The team has started their journey, and today they need to cross this mountain, so the road is not as easy to walk. The officials began to form a team, with hundreds of people preparing to climb the mountain. Su Ying looked at the lush mountains, with a pair of phoenix eyes shining brightly. She caught a bear last night, and today she doesn't know what else to gain. Su Ying carried two little nannies on her back, her figure still light, but she didn't walk too fast. Instead, she always kept a certain distance from Xiao Jin and the others, not letting him be too far away from her. In case something unexpected happened, she couldn't come forward in time. On the way, Su Ying casually picked all the bacteria she saw and put them in the space to pass through with an instrument to see if they could be eaten, without worrying about being poisoned. Due to the large number of people in the team, the speed of progress was not fast. It was not until noon that they reached the halfway point. At their current speed, they could not get down the mountain before dark. "Everyone stop and rest in place," shouted the official ahead. Su Ying carried two small milk bags and found a big tree to put them down. Bao had eaten and drank enough in the morning but didn't walk, so his spirits looked good. Su Ying took out the dry food from her body and put it in her little hand. "You're hungry, eat quickly," she said. Bao looked eagerly at the dry food in his hand, but couldn't bear to eat it. Instead, he carefully put it into his small pocket and said, "I'm not hungry. If my brother gets injured, I'll leave it for him to eat." Su Ying looked at her face, which had become particularly bright due to her emaciation, and her cold and hard heart was about to melt. "Brother, I haven't woken up yet. I've already kept his portion for him. You can eat it," she said. Upon hearing what she said, Bao happily took out the dry food and took a bite. Su Ying took advantage of this gap and took out the potion he had placed on his body to inject into Bao, then touched his forehead. Although it was not as hot anymore, there was still a slight fever. "How is Jia doing?" Su Ying turned around and almost bumped into Xiao Jin's face. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Mountains and Forests, Night Stay. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Mountains and Forests, Night Stay. Xiao Jin looked at Su Ying, who was only a palm away from her. Her body stiffened, and a hint of disgust flashed in her eyes. Her body quickly retreated, allowing her to stay further away from her. His subconscious disgust made Su Ying very unhappy. If it weren't for her, he would still have a foul smell of rotten meat and a face that despised her. Su Ying gave him a cold glance and, seeing that he was concerned about Bao, she said coldly, "There is still some low fever. The redness and swelling of the wound have not completely subsided, but it's not a big problem. Xiao Jin reached out with a worried expression to touch Dabao's forehead. Although there was still a slight fever, Dabao's condition seemed to be better than yesterday. It was likely that Su Ying's medicine had taken effect. Su Ying originally intended to take advantage of this gap to search for some supplies in the mountains, but the officials have been patrolling back and forth. If she were to leave the team now, it would be too conspicuous. She was afraid that the officials would cause trouble to Xiao Jin and the others while she was not around, so she could only give up temporarily. The team has rested for about 3/4 of an hour and will continue on their journey. Hurry up your movements. If you can't get off the mountain before dark, prepare yourself for the beast, the official shouted ahead, whipping the slow-moving criminal up. Everyone is afraid of being beaten, even if they are too weak to lift their legs, they can only continue to grit their teeth and walk forward. The more the team moves up the mountain, the darker the light becomes, and the scorching sun in the sky cannot penetrate the thick leaves and shine into the forest. Due to the large number of people in the team, all the small animals in the mountains and forests were startled away. Along the way, Su Ying didn't even see a wild rabbit. The sky gradually darkened, but they were still on the mountain. The forest was so dark that we couldn't see the way forward anymore, so we had to continue walking in the dark. Boss, I'm afraid we won't be able to get down the mountain before it gets dark. Let's find an empty space to settle down, suggested the official. The chief official nodded as he looked at the deep forest sinking in the darkness, unable to see his head. Find a larger open space, and it would be best to surround the people, he said. There happened to be a flat slope ahead, and I went to see if it could accommodate hundreds of people without any problem. Then go over there. Under the command of the official, the team arrived at Pamper. The vegetation here is relatively sparse and can penetrate some faint moonlight for illumination. After arriving at the place, the official began to distribute today's dry rations. Su Ying put down the 2 children and followed them to get the dry rations. She didn't lack this batch of dry rations now, but if she didn't receive it, others would surely cause unnecessary trouble for her if they saw the plain dry rations in her hands. She is not afraid of trouble, but she cannot ignore the safety of her 2 children. Although those officials didn't want to give the dry rations to Su Ying, they still thought of Su Ying's fist and honestly put the dry rations in her hand. Su Ying walked back and heard the pleasurable cries of Bao. Brother, you're awake. Su Ying couldn't help but quicken her pace. With the faint light of the nearby fire, she saw that Bao had already opened his eyes. Jia. Xiao Jin approached and carefully helped Bao onto himself. Bao looked around weakly with big eyes and said, Dad. Xiao Jin watched as Bao woke up, and the fierce aura between his eyebrows slightly faded. Just wake up, it's good. Wake up, come on, drink some water first. Su Ying handed over the water bag on her body, which was carried with her during exile. However, the water bag was not ordinary water, but a nutrient solution she had filled from the space. As soon as Bao saw Su Ying, his small sword eyebrows furrowed and he stared at her in fear and anger. You bad woman, don't come over, he said. Su Ying looked at the little guy's stubborn appearance and didn't step forward. Instead, she handed the water bag to Xiao Jin and said, it shouldn't be a big deal if he wakes up. This is dry food and water, let him eat some. Xiao Jin gave Su Ying a gloomy glance before picking up a water bag and delivering it to Bao's mouth. Jia, drink some water first, he said. Bao just obediently opened his mouth. At the moment when the water flowed into his mouth, he opened his eyes in surprise. Why does this water taste sweet to drink? Due to Bao's rejection of Su Ying, Xiao Jin became a nanny, fed Bao water, and then fed him dry food. Bao was still too weak. Not long after he had eaten enough, he leaned back in Xiao Jin's arms and fell asleep. Su Ying was chewing dry food in her mouth, while a pair of shining phoenix eyes constantly observed the situation around her. Xiao Jin said that someone had targeted the people in the royal palace all the way, which indicates that among these hundreds of people, there are also many who want their lives hidden, so she must not take it lightly. Before going to bed, the official held a long whip and his eyes were sharp as he wandered around the group of prisoners. Be honest with me at night, don't think you can run out of this mountain on your own. I tell you, even if you can escape our eyes, you can't escape the sharp mouth of the beast. The prisoners who were exiled before wanted to escape from here, but now their bones have been bitten by the beast. If you don't want to die now, just stay here obediently. The official shouted a warning and walked around among the prisoners before returning to his position to guard. As the night grew deeper, the prisoners who had been rushing all day fell into a deep sleep. Su Ying leaned against the tree and took a nap. When she felt the air around her becoming calm, she suddenly opened her eyes. They were in a position that could avoid the sight of the official's patrol. She glanced at Xiao Jin and the others, and saw that Jiang Yang was not sleeping but standing guard. It was then that she quietly touched the direction of the Black Mountain. Jiang Yang watched as she left, frowning and secretly thinking that Su Ying wanted to play some tricks again, but because he wanted to protect Xiao Jin and the others, he didn't dare to follow recklessly. As soon as Su Ying left, another figure quietly climbed up in the ranks of the prisoners. After the patrol officer passed by, he silently ran towards the direction of the mountains and forests. Even though the mountains and forests were dangerous, compared to being exiled to the wilderness in the north, there were still people who would let go. After seeing out of the sight of the official, the prisoner ran frantically towards the mountains and forests. He didn't know how long he had been running until he was too tired to lift his legs before leaning against a big tree and panting heavily. The surroundings were so quiet that the needles could be heard falling to the ground, and only his heavy breathing remained in his ears. However, as he took a slow breath, he found that the breathing in his ears was getting heavier and heavier. He widened his eyes in shock, stiffened his head and looked behind him, facing a pair of eyes emitting green light in the darkness. After Su Ying left the team, she entered the storage space. She spent a lot of energy all day, and that little dry food couldn't satisfy her growing desire for meat. She took the jerky from the shelf and took a bite, and the crispy roasted bear meat instantly caught her head. After eating and drinking enough, she stood up and took some anesthesia and a dagger from the shelf to prepare for the evening hunt. As soon as Su Ying emerged from the space, she heard a scream piercing through the calm night sky. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Shen, tearing the white tiger with hands. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Shen, tearing the white tiger with hands. The mournful scream appeared particularly abrupt on a peaceful night, and the guards were so frightened that they looked deep into the woods. But deep in the mountains and forests, it was pitch black and they couldn't see anything. Someone must have run away at night. You guys go count the number of people for me. The official in charge spat on the ground in anger. Several officials obediently counted the number of people. After the scream sounded, Xiao Jin woke up. He held the two children in his arms and looked around cautiously, but did not find Su Ying's figure. Where is Su Ying? She sneaked into the forest. That poisonous woman was eaten by the wild beasts in the mountains and forests. She really deserved it. She died so cheaply. Jiang Yang said in a resentful voice. Xiao Jin squinted her eyes. Su Ying also went to the mountains and forests last night. What exactly is she going to do? A cool breeze suddenly blew from deep in the forest, with a nauseating and bloody smell mixed in with the refreshing breeze. Xiao Jin's nerves became tense in an instant. He hugged the two children tightly and asked Jiang Yang to help him up. A pair of dark eyes stared tightly in the direction of Lin Zi. The pitch-black mountains and forests are like a giant beast with a big mouth open, capable of devouring people with just one bite. Suddenly, there was a low growl in the forest that seemed to roll out of the throat, and everyone stood up in fear, staring in the direction of the forest. In an instant, a pair of green eyes appeared in the darkness, and its massive body gradually revealed under the moonlight. The faint moonlight shone on everyone's faces, making them look even paler. Yes, it's big, big bug, big bug. Suddenly, someone let out a scream, and everyone turned and ran away. Roar. A tiger roar shook the mountain. What are you still doing here? Hurry up and take the person to the tall tree. Su Ying returned to Xiao Jin and the others at some point. Seeing that they hadn't moved, she reached out and hugged the 2 milk bags in his hand. Jiangyang regained his senses and quickly carried Xiao Jin on his back, turning around and climbing up the tree behind him. Fortunately, all the trees here are towering trees, with thick and strong trunks that can accommodate a few people. Su Ying first carried the child up the tree, and after Xiao Jin and the others came up, she placed the child in his arms. Xiao Jin's black eyes darkened as he saw her going down. Su Ying, what are you doing? Su Ying turned around and said expressionlessly, I finally encountered such a big piece of meat. Can I just let it run away like this? Before he could finish speaking, the person rushed towards the tiger. Jiangyang was stunned as he looked at Su Ying's back. He must have misread, otherwise why would he see an excited faint light in Su Ying's eyes? Is this poisonous woman crazy? That's a giant white tiger twice the size of a normal tiger. She may not even be enough to fill the gaps between by whose teeth when she rushes over with her size. Xiao Jin was also slightly stunned, as he clearly saw the confidence in Su Ying's face that he was determined to win. Does this woman think she can kill a white tiger as big as a few? Where did she have such great confidence? Su Ying didn't know what they were thinking. At this moment, she was so excited that her pores all over her body opened up. How much meat does this big white tiger need? With a roar, the white tiger rushed into the crowd and bit several prisoners to death. The other prisoners were frightened and fled everywhere, even the officials were hiding far away, and no one dared to approach it. Su Ying rushed all the way to the back of a big tree, found a location, and then shot the anesthesia needle out. However, the dosage of this anesthesia needle was slightly lower and did not immediately lower the white tiger. Su Ying pulled out the dagger from her waist and climbed onto a big tree. After identifying her position, she leaped for life and jumped onto the white tiger. Her legs tightly gripped the white tiger's neck and her hand grabbed its ear. Suddenly, there was an extra person on his back, and the white tiger angrily threw its body wildly. However, Su Ying's legs were tightly clamped, and it couldn't even shake it off. The white tiger let out a roar and suddenly collided with the nearby tree. Su Ying suddenly raised the dagger in her hand and fiercely stabbed Bai Hu's eyes. Roar, roar. White tiger roared in pain, causing a heart-wrenching sensation. However, Su Ying's eyes showed a bloodthirsty excitement. She pulled the mechanism on the dagger, and the dagger immediately hit White Tiger's brain. Su Ying turned her wrist and stirred it violently, causing the tiger's body to stiffen and crash to the ground. Su Ying pulled out the dagger, and blood mixed with the tiger's serum splashed all over her face. She wiped her face and jumped off the white tiger. This white tiger looks like it weighs at least 1,000 pounds, and if you peel off its skin and bring it to the city, you'll probably be able to exchange it for quite a bit of money. Su Ying only thought about how many pounds of tiger meat she could quietly hide into the space, without noticing the stunned crowd. That's a big white tiger that's as simple as tearing human flesh and cloth. Unexpectedly, he was strangled by Su Ying 3 times, 5 out of 2. Su Ying, what exactly is it? In the stunned neutral of everyone, Su Ying had already neatly peeled off the tiger in its entirety. Su Ying put away the tiger's skin and impatiently shouted to the people hiding in the dark, "Where's the leader, where's the official of the leader?" When Li De heard Su Ying call him, his scalp was tingling. This demon god wouldn't even want to peel off his skin. Li Dazhuang boldly walked forward and said, What's going on? Su Ying pointed to the tiger and said, "There's too much tiger meat here. I can't finish it alone. Later, I'll divide the meat. Can you ask someone to make more bonfires to cook the meat and divide it for each person?" Although it was a bit painful, the big white tiger couldn't hide quietly in the space. She could only take advantage of the gap in dividing the meat and let some go in, while the rest was given to other prisoners, just as if she was doing a good deed every day. Upon hearing her say this, Li De took a deep breath, fortunately not wanting to peel his skin. Okay, I'll let someone do it now. The dagger in Su Ying's hand was very sharp, and soon she picked off all the tiger meat. She didn't let people get too close and put some tiger meat in the storage space when no one was paying attention. She also put some tiger bones in the storage space. Her comrades from the ancient martial arts family said that soaking wine with tiger bones was a great supplement, but unfortunately not all of them could be included. When Su Ying returned to Xiao Jin and the others with roasted tiger meat, her 4 pairs of eyes stared straight at her. Xiao Jin's eyes were deep. If he hadn't seen her decisively and ruthlessly kill such a big tiger with his own eyes, he wouldn't have known how much strength this woman had hidden from him before. Jiangyang was really shocked. After all, Su Ying's previous impression in his mind was that he was a foolish flower fool. The 2 small milk buns were directly frightened. After all, the scene at that time was too bloody. Su Ying brought the grilled meat to Bao and smiled. Roasted tiger meat is very delicious. Bao's mouth was flattened and his eyes were full of tears, as he was about to cry. You're injured, you're injured, you're injured, you're crying. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Meets, dies with closed eyes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Meets, dies with closed eyes. Su Ying was taken aback and looked at the pitiful crying face of the little guy, completely devoid of the joy that big meat had gained. I'm not injured, all of this is tiger blood on my face. Su Ying wiped her face before realizing that it was sticky and she couldn't bear it. Xiao Jin frowned slightly and said, "Stay away from the child." His cool tone carried a clear displeasure. Su Ying didn't argue with the child in front of him. She stuffed the meat into Jiang Yang's hand and turned around to wash her face with water. Not far from the flat slope where they settled, there was a stream. Su Ying squatted on the shore and washed her face, reaching out to touch her sticky hair. When she smelled the sweat on her body, she couldn't help but jump into the stream and take a bath, while also washing her clothes. After she landed, she entered the storage space again and used a dryer to dry herself before returning to the flat slope. At this moment it was already dawn, and the prisoners in the team were all given a piece of meat, eating it in large gulps with dry food. Since being exiled, they have never tasted meat again, and tiger meat is just a simple roasted dish. But for them now, it is already the most delicious delicacy in the world. What are you doing? Don't grab my meat, that meat belongs to me, ah. A shabby woman with a small and disheveled figure fell at Su Ying's feet. You can't snatch my meat. Even if she fell, the woman stumbled up and wanted to retrieve the stolen meat, but the other party had already run away without a trace. Su Ying has never been a meddler, but she always feels familiar with the people on the ground. After thinking for a moment, she reached out and pulled the person up from the ground. Ah, don't touch me. The woman's reaction was strong, almost jumping up from the ground and pushing Su Ying away. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. Upon hearing Su Ying's voice, the woman paused for a moment and turned her head straight to look at Su Ying. Wang Fei. Su Ying stared at her face because it was too dirty. It took her a while to recognize the woman in front of her as her eldest maid, Bai Shuang. White Frost. Bai Shuang saw that Su Ying recognized her and a smile appeared on her face. It's a servant, it's a servant. In Su Ying's memory, Bai Shuang had been serving her since childhood and was truly loyal to her. Later, after marrying Xiao Jin, she followed her to the Qi prince's mansion and privately advised her to live a good life with Xiao Jin. But at that time, her brain was not working well, and she couldn't listen to anything others said, so she was completely focused on Xiao Ju. Are you alone? Where's Xiao Mama? Xiao Mama was her wet nurse and also accompanied her to the Prince Qi's mansion back then. Upon hearing this, Bai Shuang's eyes turned red and she choked up, saying, Xiao Mama, she's almost exhausted. Bai Shuang and Zhao Mama were the only two people in the Prime Minister's mansion who truly cared for her. Upon hearing Bai Shuang's words, she felt a bit overwhelmed. Perhaps this was the emotional residue left by the original owner's conscience. Where is the person? Take me to see. Bai Shuang nodded, and Zhao's mother felt the most pain for the princess. Before she died, she could see the princess and close her eyes. From Bai Shuang's mouth, she learned that she had been searching for Su Ying's whereabouts with Zhao's mother on the way to exile, but shortly after, Zhao's mother fell ill and has been dragging on until now. Zhao's mother was placed under a big tree by Bai Shuang. If you don't look closely, you can hardly see her chest heaving, and she feels like she's dead. In Su Ying's memory, Zhao's mother has always been a very kind old man, with a smile that is very similar to Amu's, but now she is only skin and bones thin. Mom Zhao, wake up. I have found the queen. The queen is here to see you. Wake up and take a look. Zhao's mother seemed to have heard Bai Shuang's words and opened her eyes, staring blankly at Su Ying. Wang, princess. Su Ying looked at Zhao's mother, who was as angry as silk, and suddenly remembered Amu who had fallen in her arms and was on the brink of death. She instinctively grasped Zhao's mother's hand and said, Amu, don't be afraid, I will definitely cure you. Zhao's mother looked at Su Ying and smiled contentedly, but her eyelids gradually closed. Su Ying felt a chill in her heart. She had already watched Amu leave her once, and she would never let such a thing happen again. Su Ying began to check on Zhao's mother. In the end of the world, studying medicine had reached its extreme, and even traditional Chinese medicine had made great breakthroughs. She had received Chinese and Western medicine since childhood, and her proficiency in traditional Chinese medicine was no less than that of Western medicine. She diagnosed Zhao's mother's pulse and soon discovered a problem with her pulse. It's pneumonia. It has been detected to a very serious extent, but fortunately, Zhao's mother's heartbeat is still there, only temporary shock. After Su Ying confirmed her illness, she got up and searched for her back to enter the space. When she came out again, she already had injections and potions in her hands. Bai Shuang, go get some water over here. Bai Shuang did not doubt that he had stood up and left. Taking advantage of this gap, Su Ying injected the anti-inflammatory solution into Zhao's mother, and then took out the medicine and nutrient solution to feed her. In this cannibalistic exile team, the elderly, weak, women and children were the first to fall, and it was not easy for Zhao's mother and Bai Shuang to hold on until now. When Bai Shuang brought back the water, Su Ying had already done everything. She took a sip of water and then stood up to have Bai Shuang help Zhao's mother up and carry her on her back. Princess, let the maidservant come. You are so delicate and precious. Su Ying lifted the person on her back and said, you don't seem much heavier than Zhao's mother. I can carry it wherever you want. You come with me. Bai Shuang looked at Su Ying, who was walking lightly, and stood still. Just now, because she was too nervous, she didn't notice Su Ying's changes. Now, looking at her, the princess is still the familiar appearance she can't bear, but her words and actions are completely like a different person. In the past, the princess couldn't lift her shoulders, let alone effortlessly carry someone on her back. Sure enough, hardships make people grow. Bai Shuang attributed Su Ying's changes to the hardships she endured on her way to exile, which gave Su Ying a good reason to explain her transformation. Xiao Jin frowned faintly as she watched Su Ying return carrying Zhao's mother and Bai Shuang on her back. He knows these two people and has always been loyal to Su Ying. Su Ying placed Zhao's mother on the ground and took a piece of tiger meat from her body, handing it to Bai Shuang. Eat it, you'll have the strength to drive on, she said. Bai Shuang looked at the dried meat and didn't pick it up. I'm not hungry, I'll keep it for the queen to eat, she said. Su Ying pointed to the remaining tiger skeleton not far away and said, did you see that big tiger last night? I killed it, and that bundle is full of its meat, enough for me to eat. Bai Shuang listened and stayed in place. She knew that a white tiger had come out last night, but because they were far away, she didn't know who killed the white tiger. She just heard other prisoners say that it was a female demon who came out of hell. She never expected that this female demon would be Su Ying. End of this chapter.